All right. So hope everyone's having a good week. This is as you well know, it's a holiday week for July. So with it falling in the middle of the week, it kind of seems strange, but that's all right. So I hope you guys have good plans for this week and get to enjoy some time with family. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time this evening talking about or reviewing information for the norm reference. Been getting some emails, information coming in. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time reviewing on that. And then, excuse me, I want to talk a little bit about the CBM. This is pretty much the week that I mentioned at the beginning of the course where we will have a point where we're literally talking about two assignments at the same time. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but I kind of give you a heads up. This is the week when we're going to encounter that. So I'm going to talk about both tonight. So the first part of the course or the class, I'm going to talk about the norm reference, a little bit about expectations, what we're looking for, see if anyone has questions, and then I'm going to get into the CBM, share a slide deck with you, and then kind of give you some very important information, just some main points to remember as you start working on that. So looking at norm reference, I'm going to do a screen share quickly, just kind of go over the rubric to make sure we're all good and everyone's moving in the right direction. So that screen should pop up here in just a moment. All right, can everyone see that? All right, I see a thumbs up. Thank you for letting me know there. All right, so norm reference. Pretty much same general format as far as the report, what we did for informal. Just wanted to point out some things. Identifying information. This is pretty much like you did in the first report. We're going to make sure you list the date or dates that the tests were administered, the name, a little bit about it, the purpose, the reason why you selected it. Background, again, mention this, as I said last week, if you are using the same case student all the way through, you do not need to reinvent the wheel on the background. You can use the same background as you did on the informal if it is the same case student. Okay. One thing some of you are forgetting to put is any type of pertinent family information. Tell me a little bit about, that student, if they're living with aunt, uncle, grandparents, if they're in foster care. Okay. Test results, interpretation. I'm going to point this out to you. One thing that's a little bit different. I've already had some early ones turned in, and I made note when I gave them feedback. The one thing that's different, I pointed this out last week, when we're creating the tables, charts, and graphs, one thing is we're adding uh, the visual in there using a bell curve as well, where you can show those scores where they fall on the bell curve. Okay, you can mark them on there with an X, just some way that I can look at and see that you've indicated on that bell curve, and then talk a little bit about where they fall into comparison of their peers. I gave you an example last week if we were using percentile ranks. If they scored at the 52nd percentile, that student scored uh, better than 52% of the peers in that norm group, 52% or better, okay, than those individuals in that norm group. It's basically what that is telling us. So don't leave that section out, okay, when you're doing that. Make sure you highlight some of the strengths and weaknesses you identified. Summary and conclusion, pretty much doing that the same exact ways we did the informal. And then any recommendation you have based on modifying work, making some accommodations or modifications to work. Do you need to drop it back some grade levels? Okay, always mention that. That's one way you can do it when you're looking at modifications. Also, make sure, even if it is the same case study student, that you include that permission form. Okay, it's important. That's easy points right there for you, so don't overlook that. Then another thing, remember, you're going to take the data you've collected from the norm reference and use that data only to create or develop a lesson plan based on the weak areas that were identified from this normed assessment. We're not going to pull information from the informal. You've already done that. This is strictly over the norm reference. So don't forget to go in, use the templates that's provided in 805 resources, and then include that lesson plan. Okay. So really there's no,
Rosie,
yeah.
on the permission slip, can it be the same exact one if you're using the same student?
And student, just make sure you go underneath what you listed for the informal and write the norm reference assessment you used, and you can just scan that and upload it and send it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So if it's that same case study student, as Jordan pointed out, the next week when you do the CBMs or the next assignment, if it's that same one, you use that same form, literally write the CBM underneath the norm reference one, scan it back in and submit it. Okay. If it is the same student. Any question over the norm reference, the one major or
On the
big thing that's a little bit different?
CBMs, I got a question.
Do
On the
what?
CBM, do you want to know if it's the fluency or if it's the just the other one? Because there's one for fluency and then there's one for like comprehension.
We're on the CBM.
Yeah, on the Easy CBM website, it gives you fluency and then it also gives you comprehension. Do
Yeah.
we need to specify which one we are doing?
Yes, just specify it when you name it.
Okay.
All right. Any question on the norm reference before I switch over and start really talking about CBM and going over that? I'm going to share the slide deck. We're going to look at kind of what CBMs are, and then we're going to also talk just a little bit to give you some ideas to think ahead. I know it's a couple weeks out, but you need to use this time to get the data points. Okay. So anything before I switch off of norm reference?
Professor Posey, I have a question. If we're using the model student, do we need to do anything for the permission form? Is there any like version that you want us to do?
Yeah. So if you're using the alternate assessment, I say it's alternate assessment or the alternate method to complete the requirements of this assignment. Is that what you're talking about, Cayman?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay. So if you're doing that, you'll just get in the permission form and just write testing lab video via Dr. Posey, and then sign your name on it, and then write WJ4 on there as well. And you'll submit that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So anybody else using that assignment, remember also, this brings me to this point, the testing lab video, if you need to use it, remember it is in SPED 805 resources, and I believe it is the last item in that folder, and it'll say testing lab video. Then you also need to get the data. The data, if you remember last week, and I'll tell you again this week, it is in the folder that's labeled week 4 and 5. It's a combined folder. Remember, it says week 4 and 5. You'll open that folder, scroll down, and it will be the last item listed, and it will say comprehensive report. That is the report that has the data that goes with the testing lab video. Okay? So I do have some individuals going to use that. All right. I'm going to stop this screen share, and I'm going to switch over to the slide deck for CBM quickly. I'm going to kind of go through it, talk a little bit about CBMs. So curriculum-based measurements. So as I mentioned, this is kind of the week where the two overlap. And the reason is because it takes several test sessions or test administrations to get our data points, what we're looking for this CBM assignment. So what is CBM basically? Curriculum-based measurements. So they are some assessments or screenings that we can use ongoing to kind of gauge whether that student needs some early intervention strategies. Also, it is a quick way that we can track students to determine if they're falling behind and falling behind their peers. It also gives us an opportunity to closely monitor student performance and give us the information we need if we need to make some quick adjustments as we are progressing forward teaching specific concepts, whether it's reading or math. So we often hear curriculum-based assessment and curriculum-based measurement. So CBA uses content from the curriculum to basically assess student progress. Okay, it's an informal assessment. So curriculum-based measurement, it monitors their progress by frequently comparing the student's progress with an expected rate of progress. Okay, so we're given frequent short assessments. If we're teaching multiplication, it gives us frequent data to make sure that the students are understanding the concept of multiplication and the particular facts that we might be focusing on in a given week. If we're working on multiplication facts, factors of 2 or factors of 3. Okay. It also gives us an idea whether that child's making adequate progress and whether we need to stop and make some type of adjustments. Okay, effective CBMs, are they doing their job? Okay, there's a lot of different ones out there. I'm gonna give you a couple resources tonight, websites to go to kind of look at if you are having trouble deciding what CBM you might want to use, or what type of tool. So basically, it's a tool that you can use that you are confident in as a teacher to determine if that child's making adequate progress. We want it to be reliable. We want it to be valid. We also want it to be easy to use and easy for us to understand so that we know how to, as classroom teachers, how we can use the data to change our instruction. So it's basically ongoing data-driven instruction is what we're doing, okay? We also, CBMs, the information we get, we want to make sure it's easy to explain to our parents and also other school personnel. You may be doing this with some students to determine or to get data that you need to determine if that student needs to actually have formalized testing to see if they qualify for services, okay? Most CBMs are very inexpensive. Most of them you can find, they're free out there. I'm going to give you a couple websites tonight that you can go to find them, okay? So constructing or utilizing CBMs for reading. Two of the most common ones in the areas of reading are in fluency or comprehension. Okay, those are the two most common ones. So fluency probes, you're going to hear the term probe. We're going to talk about that. That's what you're going to hear, especially as we get more into talking about the CBM assignment. Basically, a probe is the testing instrument we're going to use. It's just a different name for it, okay? So the fluency probe or testing instrument, we want to make sure it's on grade level or instructional level if that student's already on an IEP. Okay, so for an example, students can read a passage orally for 1 minute while the teacher records the errors. Okay, so basically you would look at number of words read correctly per minute, come up with an accuracy rate. Okay, that gives you your fluency score. Comprehension, a lot of times we look at what's called the maze test. So students are given a particular passage and the teacher, you might pull a passage and you'll go in there and white out certain names. Okay, you're going to make sure there are missing words in there. So you're going to ask the student to read that. And then maybe for each missing word, you're going to give them 3 choices. They'll select that choice that they feel like is most appropriate in order to help make that passage make sense, make it readable to where they can understand it. So we often call that, you can call it a maze or a cloze test. CLOZE is a term that we use to call that. Scroll on down here. So I think earlier on, maybe in week 2 or 3, I think I might have pulled this up just to kind of give you an idea on some growth charts. Can't remember, might be run together with another semester, but for weekly growth in reading, and this is in growth in words, okay? So here's a recommended chart. Provides data. So for grade 1, it's talking about a realistic growth rate of 2. If it's special education, it's 0.83. General ed is 1.8. And if they're really ambitious, 3 words. Okay. And it goes all the way up to 6th grade. Okay. A lot of times when I show this slide, I've had questions before. How come it really doesn't go above 6th grade? And a lot of times when I say traditional reading classes, where it's a designated class where reading concepts are taught. A lot of times, once students get above 6th grade, you really don't see those scheduled. I don't know if you're in a middle school setting and you see a traditional reading class on your schedule, but a lot of your elementary or upper elementaries, reading classes usually are not scheduled after about 6th grade. So that's why on this chart it stops at 6th. Okay, so determining progress at fluency. So we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. I'm going to kind of mention this and then we'll get into more detail next week. A term talking about baseline. And so when we're doing our probes, and then we're preparing our report, we're collecting our data points, we're going to need to determine a baseline. And usually that's determined after you give your first 2 probes. You kind of come up with the baseline where the student is. Okay. For this class, because we're limited on time, we'll have them read, if you're doing reading, we'll do two passages or 2 data points. Okay. And come up with a median score to create the baseline. Then after that, we're going to establish a goal and we're going to plot an aim line. So tonight you're going to hear a little bit about now the baseline. And the next thing is we're talking about the aim line. And so for the CBM, once we get into this and talk more about it, once we've established that baseline and know where they're at, we're going to basically predict the rate that we think they're going to improve. And so when we're creating that chart or that graph, we're going to put our plots on there and create what we call the aim line. This is what we hope to see as we're giving the probes, collecting our additional data points. When we get into this assignment on CBM, our goal the next couple weeks is for you to collect 6 data points. That means you're going to have to give that probe 6 different times. That's why I'm bringing this up tonight to give you time to think about it so you can kind of spread these out over the next 2.5 weeks to where you don't have to clump them all together at once. You can administer it, wait 2 or 3 days, give another probe, wait a couple of days, give it again, and spread it out over 6 different probe administrations. Okay, you can use that table to determine what would be a reasonable increase per week based on their grade level from the previous slide. I'll back it up to here. Just kind of give you an idea. You can kind of use this as a way to judge what you think their aim line would be. Now, I will tell you this. When you do your baseline, if you're, let's say, I'm just going to throw this out as an example, you give your first probe, scored out of, a 20, the student scores a 13. I'm just throwing this out there. Then the second time you give it, they score 9. So they went from 13 to 9. So that is a possible indicator that the content of that material may be a little bit above their grade level. We may need to drop that back. That's usually an indicator right there when we're trying to establish that baseline. They might score fairly well the first time, then we see a drop. Okay, so that's kind of a red flag for us that we will need to remember. Okay, back to aim line. So you can see on this slide the example. 2nd grade student, their baseline that was established was 55. Looking at a weekly increase, going back to 2nd grade, is realistic growth rate is 1.5. So I'm going back. 25 weeks of school left. Okay. This is being done over the course of the year, this example. Obviously, we can't do it for this class, but for this purpose of showing you the example, we're using 25 weeks of school. So we're going to take the 25 weeks times the realistic growth rate of 1.5 words per week comes up to be 38. And so you take the 38 plus their baseline score of 55. And so at the end of the 25 weeks, we hope to see that student up to 93. Okay, does everyone kind of see how that works? So you're going to take their baseline, look at their weekly increase. Is looking at the chart, I'll flip it back over. It was second grade. So their baseline was 55. We multiplied it by the 1.5 and we come up with 38. We're going to add 38 to their baseline. The end goal is to get 93. So if I were plotting this over the 25 weeks of school and I was given, one probe per week, 25 weeks, we want to see that aim line going upward toward the 93. Okay, so that's how we would build our aim line.
So what should we use for how many weeks of school are left? That multiplier.
Right now for this, you can just for this example, since we're doing 6 data points, just assume that we had 6 weeks of school. Okay, since we're doing the 6 data points on this example, you can see we had 25 weeks of school left. We would have 25 data points. So we would have a lot of data to input on there. Okay, so we're just going to assume that it's 6 weeks since I'm asking you to get 6 data points. Okay, good question, Ashley. Okay, so
let's say we do like the reading comprehension. We found out like on easy CBM it goes up to 8th grade, and we find out 8th grade is still too difficult. We drop it down to 7th grade. Would those still the 2 eighth grade 1 CBMs? We can still count those as part of our 6, correct?
Yeah, you have to drop them down. You can. That's right. You don't have to start over with 6 new ones. So
Okay.
and I will show you the graph next week. Okay, I will expand this out next week. I just kind of wanted to go through this and introduce you to some things to think about as you were wrapping up your norm reference. Okay, so we're going to go back over a lot of this same stuff next week and expand on it a little bit more. But to your point, and to add on to that question, what if I give it in their 8th grade and I see that it's too hard and I need to drop it back to 7th? That's fine. Okay, you don't have to start over with 6 new data points. The remainder of your probes would be at that 7th grade level. But when we go and chart this, there's going to be a third line. I've already talked about baseline. That's one of them, right? We talked about that. We also talked about the aim line. The next thing, and it would fall into play for this circumstance, to expand on her question, is we would show an intervention line. So the 3 lines that center around curriculum-based measurements: baseline, aim line, and an intervention line. So if you noticed that your baseline probes were above that student's grade level capabilities and you're dropping it back, when we chart this, you're going to put in an intervention line and show it. And so if I'm looking at it, or the parent, and you're shown on the visual, you can say, look, here is a line that I put in, and this is what we call the intervention line. I gave the baseline probes. We noticed it was above our grade level. I implemented the intervention line. I dropped it back a grade level. The remainder of the data points out here are on 7th grade level, and you can see your child, Johnny, is, gradually progressing. So we need to keep him on the 7th grade level now and work on this and build it over time. And we will continue to assess and give a data or a probe each week. And we hope with this aim line that we are showing that over the next 6 weeks, at the end of 6 weeks, we hope to see little Johnny out here at, 54 or 75, whatever it is after we calculate that, okay? So remember the 3 lines: baseline, aim line, intervention. Okay? Remember those from tonight. I will expand on those next week. I will actually pull up the chart that shows you how to go in and plot that. Okay? So I just wanted to introduce you to those tonight. I don't want to throw too much at you while we're talking about 2 assessments and you're working on them in the same week. Remember, I told you this is where they overlap. So, okay, so remember 3 lines: baseline, aim line, and intervention line. Okay. Here, it's giving an example on fluency. It talks about, kind of give you an example. They plotted data 1 or 2 times a week. Since we're in a short window here, you're probably going to be doing a couple times a week. If you started kind of after tonight, go ahead and get a jump start so you can spread them out a little bit. If the student falls below the aim line on 3 to 4 consecutive measures, you'll need to adjust your instruction. So it's going to be important as you're given these to make sure that the scores aren't up and down, or that they're going continually downward. If you see a downward projection, you need to put the brakes on again and maybe drop it back. So to add more to that answer on her question, she starts him off at 8. She drops it down to 7, gives him a couple more probes, and we're continuing to see those scores decline. What would I need to do then? I went from 8 to 7th, and I'm seeing a continual drop. What do I need? What would be my next step?
Drop it down to 6.
Drop it down to 6, right? And so after we drop it down, you would put another intervention line in there. Now, the chances of that happening in this condensed version for this class is probably going to be pretty slim, okay? Because we're working on just a couple week, short window. But if I was doing this over the course of the year, I might, and I'm plotting this in a graph, I might have a couple different intervention lines in there because I'm anticipating actually that the student's at 8th grade, and I'm going to start him there. I try to get my baseline and I see he doesn't perform that well, so I'm dropping him down to 7th. So on my graph, I would put my first intervention line. And in my report to the parent, I dropped him down to 7th grade because the scores were declining. And I gave him more probes over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and I noticed a continuous decline. I'm going to create another intervention line on my graph that I'm building, and I'm going to note to the parent his scores continually drop, so I dropped him down to 6th grade. Now, that could be the case, and he starts doing well at 6th grade. That tells me as a teacher, I over-anticipated. I overshot it by 2 grade levels. I didn't. He was new to the district. I anticipated and assumed he was at 8, and I quickly found out by plotting it and assessing him that it needed to be at 6. So that chart will paint a very good picture when you look at it. So we're going to kind of learn how to do that. All right. So if they fall below, you see continuous decline, you want to drop it down. Okay. So if it was over 25, 30 weeks, you might give it to them 3 to 4 times. For our case, if you see continuous decline at the baseline, drop it down. Give another probe and it drops again, drop and go ahead and drop it down a grade level since we are operating in a short window. Okay, comprehension. Here kind of gives you some ideas on determining progress for comprehension. Select a grade, instructional level passage, keep the first sentence intact, maybe delete every 3rd or 4th word and leave a blank. This is kind of the cloze test I was talking about. And I don't know if anybody's heard the term a cloze test. That's what this is. It's CLOZE, or maze. Okay. literally I'm pulling a passage and I'm going in there and I'm deleting. You can do it in a Word document. It's easy to go in there and delete a word, and create that space. And so you can do it every third or fourth word, have them read that, supply it, for the first blank, give them 2 or 3 choices, multiple choice, and ask them to pick the word they feel like best belongs in there to try to make that passage complete. Okay. And if you create something like that, there's some websites that'll do it for you. But if you decide to do it, here's some criteria to think about. They should not make contextual sense. They should not rhyme with the correct choice. Should not sound or look like the correct choice. Should not be nonsense words. Don't require the student to read ahead to eliminate a choice. And also should not be challenging in terms of meaning. Okay, so I want to try to keep it pretty basic, and that's using what we call the closed method or the maze method. Here's another one if you are considering spelling. Okay, haven't actually had very many choose that. Usually reading or math are the 2 most popular ones. So you can construct measures from grade or instructional level. You have 12 words for grades 1 through 3, maybe 18 for grades 4 through 8. So thing on this is you go in and score correct letter sequences. So you give 1 point for each 2 letters that are correct in a sequence. Okay. Give 1 point for correct beginning and a correct ending. So we're doing them in sequence. So an example, the word time. T and then T-I, I-M, M-E, and E. Okay, so that's 5 correct sequences there. That's how they score those. And then you would plot the number of correct letter sequences and the number of correct words. So that's kind of how you do it for spelling. Oop, I went backward. My little chart shifted. Here's kind of a recommended weekly growth for spelling. So we're looking at realistic growth rates, grades 2 through 6. So you would calculate that basically the same as you do for reading. Okay, so it gives you determining progress in math. Okay, so 25 problems. You do this a little bit differently for math. You're given 2 minutes to complete problems. You score digits correct per minute. So you get 1 point for each digit correct. So you have 54 plus 21, 75. So that's 2 digits correct. Okay, so you're going to plot the number of digits correct per minute. Okay, so if you give 25 problems and you're doing 2 digit plus 2 digit, okay, so you would have 50 digits as total is the maximum amount correct, right? So that's how you would figure that, and then you would plot it. Here is weekly growth for math digits correct per minute. Okay, it's a suggested growth rate. All right, I was trying to see if there's any other slide I wanted to share with you. I just kind of wanted to go with those main things to get you thinking about it as you move forward. You can do teacher-made test on this. You can go to a couple websites that I'm going to give you. I'm going to tell you about those. I'm going to do a stop screen share quickly. So looking at CBM, if you think you need some assistance or you're struggling on, golly, do I make one? Should I find one? There are a couple websites out there that have those. You can go in and select the grade level, subject area. So the first website is easycbm.com. easycbm.com. So when you access that website, you think, oh gosh, I gotta have a membership for this. Really, you don't. There are, if I remember right now, there are 3 different versions of that. There's what we call the light, the district, and teacher suite is what they call that. The light suite or the light version is free. It will literally ask you just to put your name, first and last name, identify the district you're working in. You don't have to give them a credit card number, none of that. Okay. It's just getting some of your information and it will allow you to access that. Okay. And you can identify reading or math. and it'll give you the grade level you can identify and different concepts, and it will generate CBM probes for you. Another one that you can go on and it will generate probes for you is interventioncentral.org. Interventioncentral.org. Those are the two common resources that are web-based, that are free, that students have used for this course if they needed help getting some probes. And so you might check those out. Remember, on easycbm.com, if you choose what's called the light version or the light suite, it won't be any charge to you.
I
Okay.
do want to add on the EasyCBM, it does do graphs for you for your students that you do them. You can do it. I haven't figured out how they do it for just a single student, but everybody that you've done CBMs on, they'll graph each student on there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that information and that helpful point.
If you go on reports to individuals, and then click on the individual, it'll show you all those graphs.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica. Remember, next week I will dive into this a little bit more in detail. I just kind of wanted to share the overview to get you started thinking about that. So you can spread this out over the next couple weeks, and you don't have to clump everything together and try to squeeze it in a short window of time. It really is beneficial, and it gives you an idea when you can get your probe and go ahead and start giving those and give some space in between each probe that you administer to that student versus trying to, get them in there and get them all in over 2 days. Again, we will talk about, and I will show you some examples next week, different charts or graphs that have been turned in that show how to go in and depict your baseline, your aim line, and then also one that was turned in for a case study student where they had to go in and plug in an intervention line because they determined, given their baseline probes, that it was above grade level. They had to go ahead and put their intervention line in right at the beginning and drop them back. So again, something to think about. Please kind of start, looking at those resources to determine, hey, do I want to do reading, spelling, math, and go on there and look at those resources to give you some ideas, and even go ahead and start giving those probes. Most of the probes, 1 to 2 minutes, really. 1 to 2 shouldn't be any more than really 3 to do them, and you're collecting the data. Again, the goal is to administer 6 of those between now and when that assignment's due. So if you go ahead and start now, I know you're kind of in the middle of wrapping up the norm reference, but just take a little time, administer one maybe with the holiday week, maybe right after the 4th of July, give one, come back in on, Sunday or Monday, give another one, and just kind of space them out. But I would encourage you to go ahead and move forward on that. Okay. Remember,
to establish the baseline, we need to do 3 estimates, correct?
You do really, like for this, I tell them you can do it on your first 2. The slide deck suggested 3 to 4, but that was looking at if they were doing it over a longer window of time. I always tell them, like for this class, because we're looking at 8-week course, and by me starting, to introduce this tonight, really you got about 2.5 weeks, just under 3. So always tell them, try to establish it. You can do it after your first 2. Take your 2 scores and come up with the median on that, and then go from there. If we had a full 16-week semester for this class, which we used to do it in, we would spend 4, maybe 5 weeks on just CBM. And so we could do a lot more. So it's kind of a condensed version of it. Okay. Overall,
okay, and then to use the passages, do we use the same passage every time if we're doing fluency, or do we choose a different grade level passage every time?
Choose a different passage on the fluency and mix it up. Try to get something that's very similar. So if you pull in passages out of a story, or try to keep it consistent, but don't give them the exact same one. But if it's a passage is taken from a, particular story, if you can, I would encourage you to do that.
Okay, and sorry, one last question. So my student just finished third grade, is going into fourth grade. Would I do a fourth grade assessment, grade level, or third grade?
How were they performing at the end of the third grade year?
He's not identified right now, so he's not on an IEP. So he's kind of struggling at grade level, but close to grade level.
I would probably go ahead and start him off at third grade. Since he was already struggling a little bit, I would go ahead and start him off there and see what his baseline is. Now, another thing you could do is if you see you start them off in what you anticipate to be the third grade level, like I'm recommending to you tonight, and if he just aces both of your first two probes, you can bump him up. Now, and you could put an intervention line on your graph, and then in your report, after the first two probes, it was determined that student needed, more of a challenge, and so, elevated them to the grade level above, and just indicate that in your report and explain it. Okay, that way you kind of you have it documented in your graph showing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you're dropping them back and have kind of a negative context. It could be something that you want to bump them up because you felt like you started a base off a little bit too low. Okay, give you an idea? Yeah. All right. Think about that. Like I said, I know this kind of overlaps, and this is, I mentioned to you week 5. That's about the point that we would. So tonight it kind of does, and I hope it doesn't make things too confusing, but at least kind of want to give you some generalities to start thinking about. And also remember those 3 lines I talked about tonight: your baseline, your aim line, your intervention line. We'll hit that a little bit more in depth next week, and I'll give you an example to show you how to graph that on your visual. Okay. All right. If nothing else, I'm gonna let you guys go. I hope you have a great 4th of July and a safe holiday. And I'll plan on seeing you back here on Tuesday next week. As always, if you guys have questions, just email and I'll check those in the morning and the evening. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good 4th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Posey.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Posey, I did have a quick question.
Yeah. Hang on
Just-
just a minute. Let me